That one. Ooh. Okay, can you guys hear us now? Please let us know.
Is it better now?
Can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Anastasia needs to let us know.
Yeah, Anastasia, class captain.
Class captain. So
let us know. Yes.
Yes,
okay, cool.
We are live.
Amazing. Guys, this is our first time going live.
It is. We're so excited. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Hey, guys.
I
respect you.
So what are you saying about me, babe?
No, but you look nice.
Thank you.
You look nice.
Thank you.
Yes.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Hey, Alina. Manasseh. Manasseh, are you the gentleman that I bumped into at the Clicks? I hope so. What a great gent, man.
What an amazing guy.
What a great gent.
So guys, we are currently waiting for George Pelser. I think George is on the line. George, can you hear us?
Hi, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Listen, can I tell you something, George? That haircut, mate, I'm going to need some tips. Hey? How's it going? Are you well?
I am well, thanks. And you guys?
Fantastic.
We are fantastic.
Man.
George, thank you so much for joining us. Our crew is online. They are waiting eagerly. They had questions, about the Lobola contract. I think before we get into it, let's get the formalities out of the way.
Yeah.
Please, could you kindly introduce yourself to, we call them the Dream Team, because they've made this platform possible for us. Please, could you kindly introduce yourself to them and just give them a short background of who you are and why you are here.
Cool. Evening, everybody, or evening, the Dream Team, if I have to say that then.
You know what it is.
Exactly. So I'm George Pelser. I'm the head of legal research at LegalWise, who's a legal expenses insurance company. And the reason why I'm here is to talk about the Lobola agreement. So I'm sure you've all seen that we've uploaded a Lobola agreement on our website, which is free to use. And, it does have some questions around it. I'm pretty sure people have asked me as well. So I'm here to, answer some of those questions, try and give some clarity on the topic as well. Just some other background about me. I am an admitted attorney, and I do specialize in family law. It's an area of law that's very close to me as well. And I've got a huge interest in family related matters, which includes customary law as well.
Amazing. Baby, George, we need to deal with the elephant in the room because we're catching a lot of heat. So Dream Team, listen, before we get into this, to all of my Basotho people, I am so sorry. I apologize profusely. I take complete responsibility. I said that in Sesotho, Lobola is it's Lobola in Sesotho, whereas it's Mahadi or Mahadi Kastswana. I'm sorry, guys. Stop coming at me. All right. So ask the question, babe.
So George, the elephant in the room. So we have been, obviously, that South Africa is diverse. We have a lot of cultures, and we have 11 official languages.
Yes.
So one question that has been, quite prominent in our DMs, on our comment section, is why did LegalWise go with the Nguni naming convention, which is Lobola, instead of looking at the other conventions, for example, Mahadi or Mahadi in Sesotho and Setswana?
So that's an interesting question, and it's something we debated ourselves. So I was working on this agreement with one of my researchers in my team, and we even considered which term to use as well. So when we look at just in general background about marriages in South Africa, if I can just give some basic background, is we do have 3 types of legislation dealing with the different types of marriages in South Africa. So we've got the Marriages Act, which was the original piece of legislation from way back. And then we also have the Civil Unions Act, which allows for same-sex marriages to be concluded as well. And then we do have the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act. So that is the act that deals with customary marriages, that allows for the legality around customary marriages in South Africa. And when we looked at that piece of legislation, so the legislation uses the word lobolo, And
Oh.
yes, so and in the definition, so there's a definition of lobola in the piece of legislation, and then it refers to all the other terms as well. So it refers to Bukhari, Buhali, Lumalo, Taka, Ikazi, Mahadi, and Mabeka. So it does deal with all of the other terms as well. I think, and we stuck with what is in legislation. And that's why we decided on the term lobola. It doesn't mean that no of the other terms are allowed to be used as well, but that's the more generic term that's used in the law.
So can I tell you, George, I was quite impressed by how you pronounced all of those words. That was, I'm not gonna lie, that was quite brilliant.
Thanks.
George, I mean, in all fairness, you had to go with one, right? You couldn't say lobolo / mahadi / so that's
all
good.
right. Okay, so we've asked our dream team a couple of questions, and there are a couple of burning questions from them. So we'd like to get into it right now after that first question, because that was just the elephant in the room. Now that that's out the way.
The monkey on the shoulder.
Okay, first question. Is a Lobola agreement binding if there are no names stipulated on the piece of paper?
So in that instance, I think we must go back to, so just to explain the purpose around this Lobola agreement. I think it might come up a little bit later on. I don't know what the questions are, but just to give some background about this agreement is that, it's just there to stipulate and to dictate what has happened at the Lobola negotiations. So it's not necessarily there to give how the negotiations must be conducted. It's purely just to say that this is what happened. And Lobola is an agreement between two families, the bride's family and the groom's family. So we do make provision in the agreement for the representatives to be named and signed as well. And the reason for that is so that when we look at contracts in a general sense, it gives rights and obligations to any party that's involved in that contract. So if you have a contract, a piece of paper, a written down contract, and there's no names in that contract, you will never know who's responsible for what in that contract. So, I mean, if we go to get a cell phone contract, I mean, our names will be on that contract as well as the service provider. And it gives an explanation as to who's responsible for what. And that's the purpose for having names in this type of agreement as well, is to indicate who was present at the Lobola negotiations, and just to give it a better clarity as to who's responsible for what as well. So that should there be a dispute in the future, it's easy to go back to this document and to see that, oh, these persons were there. That's the first place to start, ask questions. They were there. They should know what happened. But if it's not there, for example, or it's not in writing, it doesn't mean that the Lobola negotiations are now invalid. We do recognize verbal contracts in South Africa. So the big purpose around this is just to give that clarity and to avoid disputes in future. I mean, these types of disputes end up in court quite a lot. And, it's a costly procedure that must be followed in court to try and get, and the investigations that must go into this. So to give clarity, to have something in place and to know where do we start, should there be questions about it at a later stage.
Oh, sorry, I have a
No,
question.
go ahead.
I have a question. So in terms of the kind of disputes, I mean, in your profession, what kind of disputes do you see? What do people come in and say? Would someone say, I haven't paid Lobola for this person, it never took place? What kind of
You promised
dispute?
to marry me.
Yeah, right.
Sorry, there's a TV show called You Promised to Marry Me. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, what are you seeing in the courts?
So in the types of dispute usually also occur. So Lobola is part of the process for a customary marriage. It's not necessarily one of the requirements, but it is a process. So some of the questions that might occur is that whether there were proper Lobola negotiations. So that's one of the disputes, as well as to what actually happened during these negotiations. Were they properly conducted, or what was agreed upon? One party might come and say, well, for argument's sake, now let's say you said 10,000 Rand will be the Lobola, and the other party will come and say, no, it was 15,000 Rand, And now you're sitting with two people saying two different stories, basically. And how do you get to actually knowing what was correct, what was actually decided during these negotiations? So having it in writing, again, it's not indicating how the negotiations must have done, but we've done the negotiations. It's done now. We've agreed to A, B, and C. Let's put it into writing so that there's clarity on this. So should there be a dispute like that about the amount of or the value of the lobolo, then at least you've got a document you can come back and say, well, these persons named as the family representatives in this agreement signed, and this is what was agreed upon. And that's something that will, go a long way, because again, once you get to court, now it's this whole procedure that must be followed with witnesses having to come in, and you're sitting with who's a more reliable witness as well. Once there's documentary proof, it's so much easier to prove at the later stage.
That's amazing. So essentially what you're saying is you're formalizing the process, putting it into writing in a format in which would be admissible in court, and it almost gets rid of the gray areas.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes. Great stuff.
That's what I'm hearing.
I love it.
Second question. Well, third now.
Yeah.
So I really like this question. So it says, from my understanding of customary law, lobola is not necessarily marriage. I think you touched on that, George, briefly.
Yeah.
There are other legal requirements that result in a legal marriage under customary law, even if lobola has not been paid or settled, which means the couple will automatically be married in community of property. How does one get around that? Isn't a prenup signed prior to any lobola negotiation / celebration a better legal route to protect both parties?
So that's a good question, and quite a few elements on that. So bear with me as I try to explain all the different types of aspects in there. So the first one, where the lobola is, necessarily a requirement for a customary marriage. So that is correct. It's not necessarily once you are being lobola, now you are considered to be married. So again, I'm going to refer back to the Customary Marriages Act, the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act that we have in South Africa. So Section 3 of that Act doesn't necessarily mention lobola as one of the requirements. It does state that the couple must be 18 years or older, and the couple must consent to the marriage. So those are the first two requirements. And the third requirement is that the customary marriage must be negotiated, entered into, or celebrated in accordance with customary law. So it doesn't say, there must be lobola, or, the bride must be handed over to the groom, for example. But with that definition, and the legislature kept it wide to try and make provision for all the different types of cultures in South Africa, for all the different customs and traditions in South Africa. So it just basically says, must be negotiated, entered into, or celebrated in accordance with the customary law of the parties. So lobola does technically fall under that, but it's one of the elements that will be taken into account when looking at the validity of the marriage. And just to highlight that there was a case a few years back, I can't remember what year now, but what happened in that case is the lobola was already paid, but the bride was under the impression that we are now considered to be married. They stayed as husband and wife. She considered themselves as being married. The husband, on the other hand, was of a different opinion. He was of the opinion that, listen, this is only part of the process to becoming a marriage. He almost saw it as an engagement, if I can put it like that.
Yes.
So, and then the court eventually, after looking at all the evidence, there were a lot of evidence. Witnesses had to come in, affidavits, different types of evidence that was weighed against each other. And the court then eventually said, well, due to the fact that lobola was paid doesn't mean that you are married. There was still not consent. So remember I said one of the requirements is that the couple must consent to being married. And the court eventually said, well, there's no mutual consent here. One was thinking you are married, the other one didn't think you were married. So depending, it's not as easy. It doesn't mean now that you can just go and say, well, I never intended us to be married. As I said, there were a lot of evidence, brought before court. So that's just to highlight that lobola does not necessarily mean that it ends up being a marriage at that stage. There are certain other factors that must be taken into account. And then when we get to the other part, it's the in or out of community of property. Section 7 of the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act specifically states that customary marriages are also considered to be automatically in community of property unless you enter into an antenuptial contract, or as the question said, a prenup. So that basically means that the automatic rule will be joint estate. What's yours is yours, what's mine is yours, what yours is mine. The couples share everything. So if you want to enter into a marriage that's out of community of property, you need to make sure that you follow those legal proceedings. And it's different types of proceedings that must be followed. So for example, the antenuptial contract must be notarized by a notary, and it must be registered within a specific period of time at the deeds office in order for it to be valid. So my advice would be is to, as soon as possible, as soon as you as a couple decide that we are going to get married and the processes are being put in place, to decide as well as to how do we intend to be married. Do we want to be in community of property or out of community of property? And then to start get that process into place as well and get legal advice if necessary, so that everything is done in place by the time that the actual marriage takes place, that agreement has been finalized and signed, because it must be signed before the finalization of the marriage. So that's one way that you can deal, is to try and deal with it as soon as possible. I hope that
what you
answers.
wanted to say was make sure that you get advice from LegalWise.
Yes. Did I miss anything on that question?
I think you covered that.
You did.
Okay.
And George, I really love what you're saying, because we shared our Lobola story a few weeks ago, and we spoke about how even when we got married, we automatically married in community of property. We didn't sign any other contract because our mindset wasn't there. So I think what the beauty about this contract is that it's an introduction really to just getting the not so romantic parts about the wedding process out of the way.
Yeah.
Well, the marriage process that is.
I always say is we don't always want to think about and it's not that it's a negative, but we don't always want to think about disputes that might occur or as something that might occur in the future. You're not thinking about what will happen when we separate or when one of us dies. But you don't want to think about that at that stage. And it's important for us to think about something like that. If you enter into any other type of contract, you do think about stuff like that. You do think, what will happen and how am I going to avoid that if possible? And this is the case as well. A lot of people do enter into marriage. I've seen it when I was still in practice. They enter into a marriage not thinking about the consequences of that, and then only realizing later on that we didn't want to be in community of property. And then you have to go through the whole high court procedure in order to change it from being in community to out of community of property. And you need to, again, the requirements that you need to prove to the court is also quite extensive. So it is something to consider rather sooner than later, as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So what do we do about our unwritten contract where what's mine is ours and what's my wife's is my wife's? Can we just
that one? No, nothing we can do.
Change that one. That one you can't touch.
How do you respond to anyone who says that this agreement tends to westernize our culture?
So as I said in the beginning, this agreement doesn't stipulate how the Lobola negotiations must take place. It's not going into the traditional and custom of the different customs in South Africa. It's purely there just to note what has been discussed during the Lobola negotiation. So if you go and read it as well, it's just saying that these parties were present, this is what has been discussed, this is what has been agreed upon for the value of the Lobola, and we deal with some other aspects that we came across as well in disputes in court that end up in court. So what we try to do as well is to look at some of the common cases about this and trying to incorporate it already, so that the possibility is there. The families can look at these options and make a decision about it, so that should there be a dispute at some point, you can always refer back to this agreement. So it's not necessarily also in a sense that you have to follow exactly what's in the agreement. It's quite generic as well. So it does allow for different types of cultures and traditions to, to write down certain aspects of it as well. It's just a good overview of what has been agreed upon during the negotiations.
Amazing.
George, there was one question that I think a lot of feminists were really not happy.
That was good.
There was a sort of a clause in the agreement where it speaks about obviously it gives you those three options where please remind me, maybe. This agreement can be broken if the bride is seen to if there's misconduct
from
the
the
bride.
With the return of the Lobola amount.
Say that again.
Is it part of the return of the Lobola amount?
The return.
Yes, the refund. Because I want to be able to get my money back. I want my money back, guys.
So it's actually so this is actually a two-part question, right? So the first question, before we get to people getting really upset, how do you respond? How do you respond to people saying that in a lot of our cultures, the Lobolo money is actually non-refundable? That's one. And then people came at us to say, what constitutes the bride misconduct? What does it even look like?
So there, on the first part of the question, the contract does give options. So it does give an option for it's not refundable, or it's partly refundable, or it's fully refundable. So we try to keep it as generic as possible, and for the families to decide what they want to do, depending on the custom as well. But again, that clause is very specifically inserted due to disputes and case law. Again, these matters go to court. I know it happens, and the thing is, then again, you sit at court, and the court must decide whether this is going to be something that's refundable or not. So again, as I said, we didn't just keep it as it is going to be refundable. We do have the option there, but it has happened in where courts have said that you have to refund the Lobola amount. So with that is we looked at quite a lot of research in that aspect, but what the common principles were is that if it's due to the fault of the bride, then the Lobola must be refunded. If it's due to the fault of the husband, then the Lobola must not be refunded. So we didn't specifically include that aspect, because if it's not mentioned there, then it's only dealing with the refund and not when it shouldn't be. So and when we're looking at that, is a simple example might be, so the marriage and everything should take place tomorrow. Tomorrow is the D-Day for the finalization of the customary marriage, and then the bride comes and say, I'm not in the mood anymore. I don't want to do that.
I'm not in the mood. Let's pack it in. Thanks. Bye. Cheers. Great.
So that might be one of the examples, and it's difficult to pinpoint it to a very specific example, and it can be something that the families can also negotiate during this Lobola negotiations to say that, okay, we actually want to, let's discuss this further. We want the money to be refunded if A, B, and C occurs. Again, it's you don't always want to think about it happening. I mean, a lot of people get married and not think about divorce, and then when it happens, or if it happens, then they're sitting with, oh, but we should have done this, or we should have done that. So again, not to try and be negative and to think always about the negative, but it is something we always need to keep in the back of our minds. So in this instance, is when we're negotiating the Lobola agreement and what all that aspects around that, is to say that, what if this relationship doesn't work out? What do we as families want to do? And then, you can stipulate it in that agreement, and to say that these are the circumstances we will consider as misconduct by the bride. And then to say, well, in that instance, then we want to be refunded the Lobola.
So would you consider it insurance based on what you're saying?
I don't think it would be insurance.
I don't know, it kind of feels like insurance. Hey, listen, I would take out this insurance policy. That's all I'm saying.
You know what?
I always try and put it to basic legal aspects as well, to say that if you enter into in a normal contract as well, if you are at fault, you have to return the other party to the position they were in, for example. You know, another example would be if you're in a motor vehicle accident and you are the cause of that motor vehicle accident, you have to pay for that damages. So in this instance, the Lobola negotiations are there as a process to the customary marriage. So if, for example, that customary marriage did not take place, then the family who paid the Lobola, in technical terms, suffered a form of damage. They paid money for a specific purpose, and that didn't happen. So that's where this comes from. So to say that, you know, to kind of rectify the damages that were occurred.
Damages.
Yeah.
It's paying damages.
Yes.
George, I would pay back in 100 rands a month for the next 50 years.
So that's also something that can be put into the agreement with the families when they negotiate, is to say that who must pay this back, because the Lobola is paid to the families. It's not necessarily always paid to the bride herself.
Yeah.
So as you said, now you will pay back 100 rand a month, but it might not even be you who must pay it back. It will be your family representatives or your father, for example, who received this Lobola money. He must pay back this amount. So in the cases where there were, it was taken to court. So for example, in a divorce matter, I've come across a case where there was a divorce matter and they also wanted to claim back the Lobola that was paid. And then the court actually said that the father of the bride must be added as a party to this divorce aspect. Because it wasn't the bride who received the Lobola, it was the father who received the Lobola. So it is, again, something that can be negotiated and included into the agreement, just to avoid that confusion, is to say that we paid the money over to this person and that person will be responsible to pay the money back should we want the money back.
Amazing. George, thank you so much. Dream Team, I'd like to open the floor to you guys. If you have any questions, just make sure that you type in the comments, and then we'll make sure to read out your questions. Just a couple of questions to George. After this discussion that we've just had right now, if there are any questions that you guys have, guys, this is a one-time thing, all right? We've got a legal representative here, and if you know anything about us, we are fully invested in very healthy relationships, healthy marriages, and we made some of the mistakes of not asking these questions prior to us getting married. Thank God we're still together. Thank God we didn't have any kind of major disputes, but it could happen. And you know, there's, you know, like we spoke about this channel just now, and we were speaking about how just the other day we were speaking about how, you know, there isn't necessarily a lot of positive views when it comes to relationships, when it comes to specifically Black people's stories. So I think the more we can pull the veil back on some of these issues that are prevalent in our communities, and we can just find a way. And here's the thing, I used insurance. I know I'm sorry, LegalWise, if it's a bit offensive that I used insurance, but here's the thing. I think if we can start to destigmatize these things and say, guys, we need to find a way to talk about it in an open way, to say things that we watch on TV, when we listen to our stories, these are issues that are prevalent in our community. So why are we not getting onto a platform where we can have an open discussion about it? And LegalWise has provided us with a document that is going to create a safety net for us to say, okay, you don't have to necessarily go through this. And like my wife said earlier on, we don't like to deal with the issues that are not romantic around relationship, around marriage, but we need to deal with them. We need to talk about them, because either way, you're going to deal with them, whether before or after you say your vows. You're gonna have to deal with them at some point. You know my favorite phrase, Dream Team. I always say, don't play yourself. You know, don't play yourself. And we took a look at the document. It is not a laborious document where you're gonna, you know, where there's fine print or whatever. It is very simple. It is concise. It's literally, guys, it's, You remember how we all used to enjoy those tests where it was multiple choice and you just kind of had to circle? It really is that simple. You just fill out your relatives' details, you fill out your details. It's a document that everybody can get a copy, everybody has access to, and you know that you're protected. All right.
And baby, before you take
Go
this
for it.
question, do you have a question?
No, go ahead. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I've got one.
So,
Go
and
ahead.
what I also love about this Dream Team is that I've seen some contracts online where you have to purchase these contracts. This is a free download.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay any money to get this in your hands. It's free download. Do the right thing. Like Lerato said, don't play yourself.
For sure.
Right?
VK Mabunda says, does the Act define a reasonable amount for Lobola? Because wow, some parents count all their debts. Oh, sorry, something just came in. Okay, because wow, some parents count all their debts, then bill the groom. So the question is, does the Act define a reasonable amount for Lobola?
So the Act doesn't deal with the actual nitty-gritty details of Lobola. So it just mentions it as one of the, well, it doesn't even go that far as to mention it. As I said, it forms part of the traditions that must be followed. So it doesn't deal with all of that. So that's still open and left open for the different cultures to deal with in their respective manners. So the legislator, my argument in that is it kept it open to ensure that everybody is, covered as much as possible, and not to specify that this is what should happen. This is the amount that must be paid. This is how you must calculate the amount because of the different types of manners in which it can be done. So unfortunately, I do not have an answer on that because the law does not specifically deal with that in that much detail. So again, it's open to what's agreed upon between the families.
George, I'm going to give you a really tough job because the comments are flying in. So if you can, as much as possible, just one or two sentences so that we can just fly through them. I know you're a lawyer, you kind of need to unpack it, but let's just...
I can go on a little bit.
All right, let's just fly through these. Sipon Dlovu says, does it have to go to court even when there is an agreement?
So I'm not sure exactly what is the debt that he's referring to. So if he can...
Okay, so say we have an agreement and there's a dispute. So say we've got the Lobola agreement, there's a dispute. Does it have to go to court?
Yeah, so it's not necessary to go to court because you can use that agreement to negotiate with the other parties as well to say that this is what you signed, this is what you agreed upon. But unfortunately, if there is still a dispute after that, then it can go to court. And then at least it will be a quick and easy one because the court is going to look at this document, ask, did you sign this? Yes. Were you in agreement with this? Yes. Case solved. So that's why it's easy to negotiate it with the contract in hand beforehand. Otherwise, you're just going to waste a lot of funds going to court.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you.
So another question, it says, if the Lobola money is not paid in full, is the marriage still valid? That's a nice question.
Yes, so that will depend on what has been agreed to between the families as well. So when you look at the agreement, it does not necessarily refer just to a full amount of Lobola. It does refer for make provision for an amount, or for example, cattle, or for the down payment to be made, and then a space is open to negotiate any other types of manners of payment. So if the families want to agree on making installments, for example, that's also possible with that agreement. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the marriage will not be valid. It all depends on what has been agreed upon.
Amazing. I love this comment from VK Mabunda. He says, also, there should be a law demanding that all couples submit proof that they attended the LegalWise Lobola lesson before paying out any money. LegalWise, you guys need to come up with a certificate. That's it. Thank you, VK Mabunda. Gwena says, refund prior to consummation might make sense, but otherwise, these refund options don't sit well with me. Interesting perspective, George. Thanks for the informative conversation. You want to take that one?
Amazing. So this one from Setu says, what do you do in a situation where you do not agree with the bride price your family has set?
Ooh.
So from the knowledge I have is that, this is negotiated between the uncles and the respective families. So to be honest, I do not know how much say the groom has in the amount or the bride has in the amount that has been negotiated. But if you are privy to this information, I do feel that you can, depending on what your cultures and traditions are, but you can raise it, raise your opinion and see what will happen, and take it up with whoever's representing you in these negotiations.
Awesome.
Okay, guys, I'm going to answer three more.
Three more, and then we cap it.
All right. Given the term that Adna bank to keep Lenkomo, so there isn't a bank to keep these cows, can this stand in court as a strong argument since the bride's parents usually use the money for the ceremony?
And this is from Portia.
That's from Portia Dlamini Matebula. Should I read it again?
Can you just translate that part for me again, please?
There isn't a bank to keep these cows. So to keep the money, to keep the Lobola money. So can this stand in court as a strong argument since the bride's parents usually use the money for the actual ceremony?
Yes.
So basically, the bride's family actually spent the money on the actual ceremony. So what are you refunding actually?
Yes. So again, that's what, when we referred back earlier, I said, and this is something that you said, what type of disputes might occur? This is one of the disputes that might occur, to say that now we want a refund, and the other family and the other one is saying, but we paid for the ceremony. And again, I would say is to go back to this agreement and the negotiations and say, this is a possibility that might occur. What do we want to do? And to say that this is the money we pay, this is what's supposed to be what we agree it's going to be used for, and we don't want, or we want the refund. So I would say, again, go back to the agreement, try and put as much as possible in writing to avoid this type of disputes as well. Otherwise, you're going to sit with this person's word with the other person's word and trying to get that midway.
Thank you, George.
And George, what if the family simply says they don't have the money to pay it back? What do we do in that instance?
So in that instance, you're going to look at it from a normal perspective as well, is to, if they don't have the money, try and see, well, if it's something, if everybody's in agreement or the contract says that they have to refund the money, they are obliged to refund the money. So then you have to try and negotiate, like you said, 100 Rand per month, if that's possible, or, come to a different understanding as well, and just try and meet each other halfway, for example. Yeah.
Amazing. My sincerest apologies. They said, so the Max couldn't read my name. I apologize. I got you, fam. Shout out to you, fam. All right, honey, let's pick, I'd say one more, and then we'll just...
George, how many more questions can you take?
We still have some time. It depends on the difficulty of the question, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think let's take as many as possible. Babe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Which one?
There you go. That's a good one.
Oh, yes. Does the contract cater for same-sex marriages? Does it also make room for where there are damages to be paid, as when the bride fell pregnant while they were dating?
So the
that's
contract
a two-part question.
It's a two-part question. So I'm going to start with the second part about the damages. So the contract doesn't necessarily deal with that. But what the contract does deal with is, for example, to indicate that, what if the parties decide to cohabit beforehand, before the marriage. So Lobola is paid, and now they want to live together as husband and wife. So the handing over of the bride ceremony has not taken place yet, but they are staying together as husband and wife. And in that instance, we also came across a court case where the court then specifically referred to a type of penalty or a form of damages that must be paid by the family in this instance. So, you can also try and negotiate that in the same way, to say that this is the situation, and this is what's going to be taken into account, and this is the form of damages. And as far as my knowledge goes, I think this might also play a role in the amount of Lobola that's, the value of the Lobola that's going to be paid as well. In respect of the first part of the question as to whether the contract catered for same-sex marriages, so in the beginning, I did mention that we've got the 3 types of marriages in South Africa, and one of them is under the Civil Unions Act that deals with same-sex marriages. So under the Customary Marriages Act, that piece of legislation does not deal with same-sex marriages. So if you are in a same-sex relationship and you want to get married, you have to do it under the Civil Unions Act. So again, it's difficult to know always what the different cultures are going to be, and if the families will, still want to go through this process for the same-sex marriage in that instance. But the contract does not necessarily deal with that. And again, just to mention that there's a different piece of legislation dealing with that marriage then.
Amazing. We're going to read the last one because we're not going to get, and I'm going to get into trouble with the dream team now because they're going to be like, but you skipped my comment. So I'm so sorry.
Are there more questions flooding in?
Yeah, they are.
We
So
love that.
I'm going to let
I love that the questions are coming in. And
absolutely.
that people are interested in
yes.
sort of just getting the legalities out of the way and getting the process right. So that really makes me happy. Which one?
Humulimo Sinosi says, does the act have like different categories in which a person can pay the lobola in regards of their salary bracket? Because some charges are beyond what a person can manage. That's interesting.
So it's similar to the previous question we had.
Yeah.
So the act doesn't necessarily go into this much detail with lobola and how much must be paid. So unfortunately, again, no clear answer on that, and it's still open for the different cultures and families to decide upon. Yes.
Got it.
Can I answer just one question there? Sorry, yes, I've seen a question here. Setu, if you are both South African citizens and get lobola in a different country, does South African law stand or the country the ceremony happened in? So that's an interesting question, and I want to touch on it briefly because it can get quite complicated. So there are different views in our law, especially on this type of thing. So in this instance, the country where you get married in might be one of the laws that apply, but they're also going to look at the country, and this is some area where there might still be development, but it focuses on the husband. So the country where the husband is mostly resident. So that law might apply. So again, there's two different types of arguments that can be followed, and depending on the different types of factors that come into play there. So I just wanted to pick it out and to say that I don't have enough facts at this stage, but there are different types of views. So it can be that you can argue and to say, well, both parties are primarily resident in South Africa, and that the South African law will apply. But there's also another argument that because it was ended outside of the country. What I've heard people do is they have the ceremonies abroad, for example, but they don't actually get married there. If that makes sense, they come back and they sign the registration papers in South Africa. So it's almost like you go to Home Affairs and you get married in South Africa, but the ceremony, the big party was somewhere else. If that makes sense, I've heard about that. There's maybe a bit of a loophole there that can be applied. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. All right. I'd just like to read two comments just before we close it off. The one is from Sulanan M, who says, there's still a lot of gray areas in our customary traditions, which is why I love that we are doing this, which is why I love that LegalWise took the initiative to try to iron out those gray areas. This is, and guys, it's up to us. We have to be intentional then about making sure that we put pen to paper and we start to formalize these things so that we get rid of those gray areas. Your situation might be very unique to you. But as much as possible, if you can just protect yourself, protect your marriage, protect your union legally, then, I'm all for it. The very last comment that I wanted to read from VK Mabunda again, who says, I'm definitely going to watch this episode with my parents and siblings. Will make a great topic or debate for the festive season. Thank you, LegalWise and the Max. You are most welcome, Dream
I love
Team.
that it's also a conversation starter, right?
Absolutely.
He came up when saying that he's gonna get the whole family involved. So thank you so much, George, for joining us. Thank you so much, LegalWise. Dream Team, you are amazing. You were incredible. Thank you for the questions.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Yes.
On a what day is it today?
I have
on a Monday after work. Yeah.
George, thank you so much. Thank you to you and
thanks for having us.
Like my wife said, I think it's one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. No, that was a joke.
And sorry, before George goes, George, do you have any parting words? Is there anything that you want to say that we might have missed out?
No, I just want to say that I think this is, like we've said now, it's important. It's a conversation starter, and to, you don't always think about legal aspects in this way, or different topics and the legal consequences of that. So I think this is quite important, is to, plant that little seed somewhere up here, as to say that, listen, I have to start thinking about stuff in a different manner. And not just when we're dealing with marriages, for example, but any type of transaction that you go into, or any other type of contract, is to just think about it. I mean, just off the topic now, but we all do sign all these terms and conditions sometimes without reading them, and then later on we realize that, listen, A, B, and C is preventing me from doing something. So it's just to we must think and just discuss about all of this, and just open our minds and think about it a little bit more. So it's good to have this conversation. Thanks again.
Thank you, George. You look very sharp, my friend, in a tie and a shirt and that slick hair. Come on, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Have a very good night, Dream Team. We love you. Peace and blessings. You know what it is. One time, too real.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Thank you so much, George. Thank you so
Okay,
much,
then.
Thank you, LegalWise. We love you guys.
Bye.
Bye.